3 months into her marriage, Dani already knew what it felt like to be a guest in her own home. Not because of Dani. Because of the woman who had raised him. There is a specific kind of pain that comes with realizing your mother-in-law does not see you as family. She sees you as a problem she has not solved yet. Dani understood that by the end of the first month. She just did not know how far Rhonda was willing to go to solve it. 2 years before any of this, Dani had never heard of Dani Carver. She was standing at the Midland bus station on a Thursday afternoon waiting on a connection that never came. A mechanical problem, the driver said. Could be 2 hours, could be 5. The waiting area filled up fast, people with bags at their feet and nowhere comfortable to sit. Dani ended up next to her in line at the only diner within walking distance, a place with vinyl booths and sweet tea that came in glasses the size of a small bucket. They started talking because there was nothing else to do. 5 hours later, when the replacement bus finally pulled up outside, Dani realized she had not looked at her phone once. He was steady in the way that mattered. He listened when she talked, he said what he meant, and when he asked for her number at the bus door, he called the next day exactly when he said he would. A year and a half after that, they got married in a small ceremony in Midland with his family and hers, and a reception that left them with a credit card balance they were still working down. The first 3 months were good. Not perfect, but good. Then on a Tuesday morning in late October, Rhonda showed up unannounced. She came with a smile and a foil-covered dish and walked through the apartment with the slow, evaluating pace of someone checking off a list. She commented on how the furniture was arranged. She opened the refrigerator and studied it for a moment before closing it again. When Dani served chili for lunch, Rhonda tasted it, set her spoon down and said it needed more seasoning. The cornbread was a little dry too, she thought. Dani said it was great and asked for seconds. Rhonda looked at him the way mothers look at sons who have forgotten what good cooking tastes like. Dani kept her smile in place and said nothing. Then Rhonda mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that a neighbor had seen Dani talking to a man outside the building the previous afternoon. She was not accusing anyone of anything. She was just curious. She tilted her head and asked what that was about in a tone that already had its own answer. That had been Adam from her office. He had swung by to drop off paperwork she needed to review before a Monday meeting. Dani explained this. Rhonda nodded slowly as if filing it away. That evening, Dani came home and told Dani about the rotation job. A pipeline company out in the Permian Basin was hiring experienced pipe fitters for a 3 weeks on 3 weeks home schedule. The pay was nearly double what he was making locally. They needed it. The rent on the apartment, the car payment, the credit card balance that was not going anywhere on their current salaries. Dani told him she could handle 3 weeks alone. She meant it. What she did not expect was that he had already discussed it with his mother. Rhonda's position, he explained carefully, was that leaving a young wife alone in an apartment complex was not a great idea. They argued that night, not their worst argument but one of the ones that leaves a mark. At some point Dani said his mother just wanted to see what kind of wife Dani really was. He said it like it was a reasonable thing to say. Dani felt it land the way a door sounds when someone slams it on their way out. Dani went down to the parking lot for 20 minutes and called Rhonda. When he came back, his face carried the expression of a man who had been given instructions he was not sure how to deliver. He said quietly that they would find out together. What kind of wife she was. What kind of marriage this was going to be. Dani lay awake that night listening to his breathing even out, and she thought about the way Rhonda had nodded in the kitchen, slow and patient, like someone who had already decided how this story ended. Dani left for the job site 7 days later. And that same evening, after she watched his taillights disappear from the parking lot, there was a knock at the door. Dani's bus pulled out of the Midland station at 7 in the morning. Dani stayed on the platform until it was gone, which was longer than she needed to, and she knew it. The West Texas sky was already pale and wide overhead, the kind of morning that made everything feel a little exposed. She drove back to the apartment alone and sat at the kitchen table with her coffee until it went cold. The next afternoon, Rhonda knocked on the door with a casserole dish covered in foil and a smile that said she was just being neighborly. Dani let her in. Rhonda set the dish on the counter, asked for a tour of how Dani had been keeping the place, and moved through the apartment with the unhurried pace of someone who was not expecting to be asked to leave. In the bathroom, she paused and noted that the counter was looking a little cluttered. Dani, she said, had always liked things tidy. She said it conversationally, almost warmly, and then she said goodbye and left. She came back 3 days later. then 2 days after that. Each visit arrived wrapped in the same framing. She was in the neighborhood. She thought Dani might want company. She brought something from her kitchen. And each visit included its own quiet inventory. A finger drawn along the top of the bookshelf. A glance at the dishes drying beside the sink. A slight pause at the laundry basket in the hallway before she mentioned gently that Dani had always been particular about keeping the common areas clear. Dani nodded and thanked her and said nothing useful. On the 5th day she ran into Mr. Earl on her way in from work. He was crouched over the flower bed near the building entrance doing something careful with a trowel, and he looked up when he heard her coming. He asked how she was holding up with Dani gone. Then he lowered his voice and told her that Rhonda had been by asking questions. She had spoken to the maintenance man about who had been coming and going from the building and had stopped Miss Pat in the hallway to ask what time Dani usually got home in the evenings. He said Rhonda had always been like that. Back when Dani was in high school, she had found reasons to push away any friend she did not personally approve of. He said it without judgment, just as a fact she might want to have. There is a particular feeling that comes with knowing someone is tracking your movements from 2 blocks away. It is not quite anger, not yet. It is colder than that, the feeling of being studied, of having your ordinary Tuesday afternoon treated as evidence of something. On the evening of the 7th day, Dani called. He called every evening, which she had been grateful for, but that night his voice had a new quality to it, careful in a way that did not quite sound like concern. He asked how things were going, and then he asked if anyone had been stopping by. Dani mentioned that Adam from her office had dropped off some documents she needed to review. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Not a long one, just long enough. Dani said that was fine and moved on to something else. But Dani heard what was underneath the pause. Rhonda had already called him. Whatever she had seen or thought she had seen, it had already made the 2-block trip and traveled out to a job site somewhere in the basin. The surveillance was not just about making Dani uncomfortable inside her own apartment. It was a pipeline running directly into her husband's ear, and it had been open since the morning his bus pulled away. On the 18th day, while Dani was at her desk reviewing purchase orders, Rhonda let herself into the apartment with the spare key Dani had given her before he left. He had framed it as practical in case of an emergency, in case something needed handling while he was gone. Rhonda used it on a Wednesday afternoon when she knew Dani's car would be gone until at least 5:30. She went through the apartment methodically. The kitchen drawers, the bathroom cabinet, and then the bedroom closet where Dani's work shirts hung in a loose row beside Dani's clothes. Near the back, half hidden behind a heavier jacket, there was a blue plaid flannel, an older shirt, the kind that gets pushed to the back of a closet and forgotten. It was a size larger than what Dani wore now. Rhonda did not recognize it. She took it down from the hanger, held it up, looked at it for a long moment, and then took a photograph. She hung it back exactly where she had found it, left the apartment, and locked the door behind her. That evening she called Dani. She did not tell him what she had found or what she thought it meant. She just told him there was something in the apartment he should see when he got home. She said it the way someone speaks when they have already decided what the answer is and are simply waiting for the other person to catch up. 3 days later, Dani's bus came in just after noon. Dani was at the station to meet him. He kissed her on the cheek, picked up his bag, and said almost nothing on the drive back. Inside the apartment, he set his bag down in the hallway and walked directly to the bedroom. Dani followed him. He opened the closet and moved through the shirts until he found the flannel. He pulled it off the hanger and held it out. He asked what it was. Dani looked at it and told him the truth. It was an old one he had had before they got engaged, the kind of shirt that ends up at the back of a closet because you stop reaching for it. He said he did not remember it. She said people forget clothes all the time. He said not that shirt. He was certain. Rhonda knocked on the door a short while later. Dani let her in and showed her the shirt. Rhonda looked at it with an expression of careful, practiced puzzlement. She turned it over in her hands, tilted her head slightly, and said she was sure there was a perfectly good explanation. She did not accuse anyone of anything. She just made sure the shirt stayed in the center of the room. Dani did not accuse Dani of anything that night. He said he wanted to believe her. That was the whole sentence. I want to believe you. It was worse than an accusation would have been, because an accusation can be answered. That sentence just sat there. The wanting implied a distance between where he was and where belief actually lived, and no explanation Dani offered was going to close it. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being doubted by the one person who was supposed to take your side without needing the evidence first. It does not announce itself loudly. It just settles in. Dani left for his second rotation 2 days later. He hugged her at the door and said he would call when he got to the site. He did call that evening and the evenings after, but something in his voice had shifted in a way that did not shift back. He took the doubt with him like an extra piece of luggage, and Rhonda had learned something useful. A quiet suggestion placed at exactly the right moment could do more damage than any argument. She did not need to make accusations. She just needed to keep finding things that required explaining. The Saturday farmers market in downtown Midland ran along 2 blocks of closed-off street. Vendor stalls on both sides selling produce and jarred goods and bread that was still warm when you carried it home. Dani went most Saturdays when Dani was away. It gave the morning a shape. She was standing near the vegetable stalls trying to decide between 2 varieties of tomatoes when she heard her name. Adam from the office was a few stalls down with a reusable bag and the slightly lost expression of someone who had been asked to pick up specific items and was not fully confident he was getting the right ones. They talked for a few minutes about a new project their department had been handed. He helped carry her bags the half-block to the bus stop when she was ready to leave. They laughed about how the price of tomatoes had gone up since the spring. The bus came. She got on. The whole exchange was maybe 12 minutes, the kind of ordinary Saturday morning interaction that does not stay in your memory past noon. Rhonda was behind a row of vendor stalls the entire time. She had her phone out. The angle she chose framed the bag carrying as something closer than it was, and she took more than one shot to make sure she had a usable image. That afternoon Morgan showed up at the apartment. She was 22 and had her mother's directness without her mother's talent for wrapping it in something softer, which was actually one of the things Dani appreciated about her. She sat down at the kitchen table, accepted a cup of coffee, and said she had come because she thought Dani should know what was happening. Rhonda had a notebook. A physical spiral notebook, the kind you would find in a drugstore, filled with handwritten entries in her mother's careful print. Morgan had seen it sitting open on the kitchen counter. The entries logged what time Dani left for work in the morning, what time her car came back in the evening, whether her lights were still on after 10 at night, whether any vehicles she did not recognize had been parked near the building. Morgan said she had only seen a few pages, but there were more. And the market photos she added had already been sent to Dani with a message attached. Finding out someone has been keeping a written record of your daily life is a different feeling than finding out they have been watching you. The watching you can almost rationalize. The notebook means they sat down at a table open to a fresh page, picked up a pen, and decided your Tuesday morning commute was worth documenting. That is not worry. That is something with a longer timeline than worry. Dani called Lori after Morgan left. Lori had said 2 weeks earlier over sandwiches near the office that Rhonda's visits were not random and her questions to the neighbors were not innocent. She had said it plainly and Dani had halfway believed her. Now Dani told her about the notebook. There was a short silence on the other end of the line. Then Lori said a notebook. She kept a notebook, and after a beat, Dani, that is not a worried mother. That is a campaign. Dani called that evening. His voice was even and controlled in a way that meant he had already decided what he thought and was calling to confirm it rather than discuss it. He mentioned the photos from the market. He said his mother was concerned. When Dani explained who Adam was and what had actually happened at the bus stop, Dani said the photos were pretty clear. He did not raise his voice. He did not call her anything. He just said the photos were pretty clear, and then he said he had an early morning and he hung up first. Dani sat with her phone in her hand for a while after that. By the time she went to bed, she had already decided that talking to Rhonda directly was the only move she had not tried. By morning she was certain enough to do it. Rhonda's house was 2 blocks from the apartment complex, a small brick place with a tidy front walk and a porch light that stayed on all evening. Dani walked there on Monday after work with the specific calm of someone who has rehearsed what they are going to say enough times that the emotion has mostly burned off, leaving just the words. Rhonda answered the door with an expression of mild pleasant surprise, as though Dani stopping by unannounced was a delightful coincidence. She stepped back to let her in. The living room walls were covered in framed photographs of Dani's school pictures, holiday snapshots, a graduation photo, a candid from what looked like a fishing trip. Every version of him from infancy to the previous year, arranged with the care of a permanent exhibit. On the coffee table, a spiral notebook sat open to a page of handwritten entries. Dani sat down and said what she had come to say. She named the visits and the inspections. She named the notebook. She named the phone calls to Dani and the photos from the farmer's market and the questions to Miss Pat and the maintenance man. She kept her voice level. She said she knew exactly what had been happening and she needed it to stop. Rhonda listened with her hands folded in her lap. When Dani finished, the pleasant expression was gone. What replaced it was something more honest and considerably colder. She said she had never been fully convinced that Dani had married Dani for the right reasons. She said a mother could tell when a woman did not really love her son, that it showed in small ways if you knew what to look for. She picked up her phone, pulled up the farmer's market photos, and held the screen toward Dani. She called them evidence. Her voice was steady. She was not performing anymore. Dani told her she was no longer welcome in the apartment without an invitation. Rhonda said Dani had no right to say that. Dani said she did and she meant it, and she stood up and left. The next afternoon Rhonda came to the apartment anyway. Dani looked through the peephole, saw her standing in the hallway, and did not open the door. She told Rhonda through the door that she had changed the locks. It was not true, but it landed. Rhonda stood in the hallway for 15 minutes cycling through versions of the same argument, that Dani was being unreasonable, that she was a mother who had every right to look after her son's home. That Dani would hear about this. She left with, when Dani gets home we will see who he listens to. That night Rhonda called Dani. She was crying when he picked up. She told him Dani had locked her out, that she had been treated like a stranger, that she did not know what she had done to deserve it. Dani called Dani 20 minutes later. He was not crying. He asked how she could do that to his mother. Dani said she had set a boundary and she was not going to apologize for it. Dani said some things that did not leave much room for response and then hung up. In the days that followed, Rhonda stopped coming to the apartment and started working the building instead. She talked to Miss Pat. She talked to the maintenance man. She showed the farmer's market photos to anyone in the complex who would look at them, and she described what was in them with a specificity that had nothing to do with what had actually happened. Miss Pat knocked on Dani's door on a Thursday evening, her face arranged into the careful expression of someone delivering news they find both troubling and interesting. She said Rhonda had been telling people that Dani was planning to leave Dani for the man from the photos and move out while Dani was still working the rotation. Being right about something and having no way to make the person who matters most believe you is its own particular kind of alone. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that follows you from room to room. About a week before Dani was due back from his second rotation, Dani came home from work on a Tuesday evening and pulled into the parking garage. She was almost to the elevator when she heard something coming from the back corner near the water heater, a thin repeated sound, small and insistent. She stopped and listened. Then she followed it. An orange kitten was wedged into the narrow space between the water heater unit and the concrete wall, maybe 6 weeks old, thin, his coat matted with dust. He did not run when she reached for him. He looked up at her with the patience of something that has been waiting a long time and has decided to trust whoever shows up. She carried him upstairs with one hand and unlocked the apartment door with the other. In the bathroom she ran warm water in the sink and cleaned him up carefully, talking to him the whole time about nothing in particular. The way you do when the goal is just to let something small know it is no longer alone. She wrapped him in a dish towel and held him while she figured out what to feed a kitten that young, and she named him Rusty before she had consciously decided to keep him. Which told her everything about whether she was going to keep him. It was the first hour in weeks that had not felt like a move in a game she had not agreed to play. The vet saw him the next morning and said he was healthy, approximately 6 weeks old, and would need feeding every few hours for a while. He would be fine with consistent care. Dani bought kitten formula and a small soft bed and a toy that crinkled when he batted it, and she felt something in her chest loosen slightly for the first time since Dani had left. At lunch that week, Lori asked if she had told Dani about the kitten. Dani said not yet. He had been short on every call since the farmer's market incident, and she already knew how the conversation would go. He would say they had not discussed getting a pet, that the apartment lease had restrictions, that this was not a good time. Lori said to wait until things had settled between them. Dani agreed, though the agreement sat a little uneasy. Keeping things from Dani was exactly what she had been accused of doing. A few days later, on a Tuesday evening, she was standing near the open living room window going over slides with Adam on the phone. The presentation was the next morning, and there were 3 sections that needed restructuring. The call ran about 20 minutes. At the end of it, Adam said they should meet early before the workday started to go through the details one more time. She said 7:30 worked. They hung up. Rhonda was in the parking lot below the window. She heard a man's voice carrying through the evening air. She heard the word details. She heard early before the workday. She was on the phone to Dani within the hour, and her version of the conversation bore almost no resemblance to the one that had actually taken place. Dani left the job site before his shift ended without telling Dani. He called Rhonda on the drive south. By the time he reached Midland the following morning, Rhonda was already waiting near the building entrance with one more piece of information. There was a man inside the apartment right now. She had seen a shadow moving past the window. Rhonda was waiting when Dani pulled up. She told him Dani had gone to her morning meeting and come back, and now there was someone inside. She had seen the shadow again, same window as before. Dani's face did something that was not quite anger and not quite hurt. It was the expression of a man who has been told the same story enough times that it has stopped feeling like a story and started feeling like a fact. They took the elevator up without talking. In the hallway, outside the apartment door, Rhonda put a hand on his arm and told him to listen first. They stood close to the door. From inside came the sound of two voices, a man's saying the faucet was not dripping anymore and Dani's thanking him. Then the man's voice again saying it was no trouble, they were neighbors. Rhonda leaned close to Dani and said just above a whisper, "Neighbors, that is what they are calling it." Dani knocked. There was a pause inside. Quick steps. Then Dani's voice with a confusion in it that did not sound practiced. "Dani, what are you doing here?" He told her to open the door. She said give her a second. He said now. There was a reason the chain was on. After the maintenance man had finished and left through the back stairwell, Dani had gone to change out of her work clothes. She had started putting the chain on whenever she was alone in the apartment, a habit that had formed after the afternoon she came home and realized Rhonda had been inside with the spare key. She was in the bedroom pulling on a sweatshirt when she heard the knock. She came out, saw the chain, and slid it off. Dani stood in the doorway in jeans and a pullover. She looked at Dani the way you look at someone who has appeared somewhere they are not supposed to be. He moved past her into the apartment and went through it room by room: the bedroom, the closet behind the shower curtain in the bathroom, the space beside the water heater in the utility alcove. He came back to the living room and stood there. The apartment was empty except for the three of them. Dani explained it without raising her voice. The kitchen faucet had been dripping for 2 weeks. She had put in a maintenance request 10 days ago. The maintenance man had come that morning, fixed it, and left through the back stairwell. Dani walked to the kitchen and opened the cabinet under the sink. A wrench sat on the cabinet floor beside a roll of plumber's tape. The wood underneath was still damp in a small circle where the drip had pooled before it was fixed. He straightened up and stood there for a moment. Then Rusty came skidding out from under the couch, spooked by the noise and the unfamiliar voices, and ran on straight to Dani's feet. Dani looked at the kitten. He asked what that was. Dani told him. Found in the parking garage about a week ago, could not leave him there, had not said anything because Dani had been so unreachable on every call and she had been afraid of his reaction. Dani looked at the cat. Then at the apartment. Then at his mother, who was standing near the door with her purse still on her arm. Rhonda tried to recover the ground. She said the kitten was beside the point, that the point was the secrecy, that if Dani was keeping a cat from him, what else was she keeping? But something had changed in Dani's face, and it was not moving back. He had just gone through every room of his own apartment, the closet, the bathroom, behind the shower curtain, looking for a man who turned out to be a maintenance worker who had fixed a leaking faucet and left through the back stairs. That fact was sitting in the room with all of them, and no one could make it smaller. Rhonda understood she was losing the moment. She stopped talking about the kitten and said what she had been holding in reserve. She said she had raised Dani alone from the time he was 3 years old. That his father had been gone before Dani was old enough to remember him, and she had done everything, every school year, every summer, every hard thing by herself for him. She said she only wanted to protect what she had built. She said the choice was simple. The woman who had given him everything, or a woman who kept secrets and stray cats and arranged early morning meetings with men while her husband was out on the job site. Dani went to the bedroom. She came back with a bag over her shoulder. She told Dani she was going to Laurie's. Not as a threat. Not as a performance. She just could not stay in an apartment where she had to prove she existed honestly every single day. She picked up her keys. Then she looked at Rusty, who was sitting near the couch watching everything with the stillness of a creature that does not understand what is happening but knows something is wrong. She left him there. It was a deliberate decision, the one thing she could leave behind that might reach Dani when the noise finally cleared. At the door she stopped and looked at Rhonda directly. She said, "You got exactly what you wanted." She hoped it felt the way Rhonda had imagined it would. Then she walked out and pulled the door shut behind her. Rhonda said Dani would be back by tomorrow. She was just being dramatic. Young women did this. Dani looked at his mother for a long moment and said quietly, "What did you do?" There is a strange quality to the silence that follows when the worst thing you were bracing for finally arrives. It is not relief exactly, but there is something almost solid about it. The waiting is over. The shape of the damage is visible, and whatever comes next is at least real. Dani stood in the middle of his apartment with a kitten at his feet and the smell of plumber's tape still in the air, and he started to understand what the last 3 months had actually been. Rusty ate a little that evening, and then stopped. By the second day, he had gone quiet in the way animals go quiet when something important is missing from the room. The first night Dani walked the apartment until 2 in the morning. The second night he sat in the kitchen with the lights off for a long time before he moved. He would leave one room and find himself standing in the next one without a clear memory of deciding to go there. Rusty tracked him for a while and then gave up and settled into the corner of the couch, curled into a shape that got smaller each day. By the second afternoon, the kitten had stopped eating and stopped playing and mostly just lay there with his chin on his paws waiting for something that had not come back yet. On the morning of the third day Dani woke up early and found Rusty tucked into the tightest ball he had managed yet, wedged into the corner cushion with his nose buried in his own tail. Dani picked him up and sat on the edge of the couch. The kitten was warm but barely present, carrying the particular stillness of a creature whose world has gone wrong in a way it cannot name. Dani sat there for a while with the kitten against his chest and the apartment quiet around him. Some things only become clear after you have stopped trying to think your way through them. Dani had spent 72 hours arguing with himself, and at some point during the third night the argument had simply run out of fuel. What was left was obvious and had probably been obvious for a while. He put Rusty down, gently got dressed, and walked the 2 blocks to his mother's house. Rhonda answered the door in her housecoat with the reddened eyes of someone who had not been sleeping either. She stepped back to let him in and moved toward the kitchen to put on coffee. He told her to sit down. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and said what he had come to say without a long preamble because he had rehearsed it enough times in the dark that the preamble was gone. He told her he had made his choice. Dani was his wife and his future, and that was not a negotiation. Rhonda would always be his mother, and that was also not a negotiation, but she was not the owner of his home or his marriage, and she had been acting like she was. He told her she could choose to respect Dani and be part of their family going forward, or she could choose not to. But he was done being pulled in 2 directions, and he meant that in a way he had not meant anything in a while. Rhonda cried. She said she had given up everything. He said he knew that and he was grateful for it, and he meant both things. He also said she had a life outside of him, her church, her friends, a community she had quietly set aside while she poured everything into watching his. And that he had never been the right container for all of it. He was not saying it to be cruel. He was saying it because it was true and someone should have said it years ago. He stood up. He told her the next move was hers. Then he walked out. Back at the apartment he sat for a minute, then picked up his phone and called Dani. It rang long enough that he started composing what he would say to her voicemail. Then she answered, careful and quiet in the way you answer when you are not sure what version of the call this is going to be. He told her he had made his choice. He told her he had talked to his mother and said what should have been said months ago. He told her he was sorry in a way that did not have qualifications attached to it. Dani was quiet for a moment. Then she said trust was not something you restored with one conversation. It had to be rebuilt slowly, and he needed to understand that going in. He said he understood. She said she would meet him. He got to the cafe first and took a table near the window. It was a quiet weekday afternoon, the lunch rush already gone. When Dani walked in, she looked tired in the specific way of someone who has been braced for impact for 3 days and is only now letting her shoulders drop. She sat down and they talked honestly for the first time since before any of this had started. He told her he had been a coward. She did not tell him he had not. She told him that if Rhonda tried anything like this again, any version of it, even a small one, she would leave, and it would not be a performance, just a fact he needed to carry going forward. He said he understood, and she could see that he did. Then she told him her condition. A marriage and family therapist, both of them starting soon. He said yes before she finished the sentence. They drove home together. Before Dani had the door fully open, Rusty came off the couch at full speed, skidded on the kitchen floor, righted himself, tore a lap around the living room, and launched himself at her leg. She laughed, a real one, the kind that comes from somewhere unguarded, and picked him up and held him while he vibrated against her collarbone. That evening they sat on the couch with Rusty settled in the space between them, purring with the uncomplicated satisfaction of a creature whose world had been restored to its correct order. Across the street at some point the light in Rhonda's house went off. Neither of them mentioned it, whether she would find a way to accept what Dani had said, whether the community she had let go quiet would be enough to fill the space she had been using her son's marriage to fill. That was hers to figure out now. They did not know how it would go. That uncertainty was honest, and they both knew it. Dani looked down at the kitten. He said he thought Rusty had forgiven him faster than she had. Dani looked at him. She said Rusty was a cat. He had lower standards. The apartment felt like theirs again. Not because everything was resolved, some of it was not and might not be for a while. But they were facing the same direction for the first time since a Tuesday morning 3 months ago, when a woman with a casserole dish and a set of her son's keys had walked through their door like she already owned the place. That woman was 2 blocks away in a dark house, making whatever decision she was going to make. Here there was a couch and a window and a small orange cat who had forgiven everyone involved. And 2 people who had just agreed to do the harder work of rebuilding something that should never have been torn down in the first place. If you have ever been caught between the person you married and the family they came from, whose side did you expect them to take, and did they?